Now we search the template. Here we have it. Let's add a title at the bottom. This title will have the identifier comment right. We type a colon, and next we display the form, but before we'll generate the form create action. Create comment action. We'll get the request. Let's add a use statement automatically. And Slack. That will identify the post that the form is being sent to. The Slack will be string type. We create the root. We add the Slack first. The method will be restricted to post. And the template cannot be empty in this case. We have to fill it up because the comment creation doesn't have any template, but it uses the post show. Before going on, we go back to the show template. We go to the terminal one moment. We display the routes list. And Symfony is saying it doesn't understand method, so we have to import it. Back to the code. We have root and template, but not method. Let's import it. One way to do it with PHP Storm is typing directly the needed class. And it's auto-completed. Back to the terminal, we do have the routes list. And what I was searching for is this route. Go to the view, and here we add the form call. Next, we pass the form that we received from the controller. We set the action, and for that we need to set a path. And the path has to have the route we just copied. I pass the Slack. And next I concatenate a text. To concatenate something in Twig, we use a tilde. This is to access directly to the comments block. Back to the browser, update. We see that the form is displayed. Let's fix it with CSS. At the very bottom, I'll set up labels, block type, with italic text. Input will have a width of 300 pixels. Text area will have a width of 500 pixels. And a height of 150. And for the errors, that will be shown as an unordered list. Will not be list type. And the color will be pure red. Back to the browser, update, and it looks better now. Let's go for the translations. I go to command, I add write your comment. And for Spanish, write, escribe tu comentario. Back to the browser. We now have the complete translation. Let's run the test again. It's failing yet, but it's not an error now. It's not an E anymore. It's an F. F means that what's not passing is an assert. In this case, it's not finding any redirection after sending the form. Now it's time to implement the form creation. That's because the assert was not passing. We'll add a return here, array. We'll get the first post, I'll find one item from the Slack. Errors control, in case it's null, as always. Create not found exception. We add the throws. We create an empty comment. We set the post we are receiving. Now we create the form. Using our comment type. And we annex the comment we are creating. Now we use the handle request from the request. What it does is to bind the form they are sending us with the new comment we are creating. So, since it's bound now, we only have to check whether the form is valid or not. If it's valid, we'll save it to the database. And we'll finish with a flush. To let the user know that his comment has been successfully created, let's get the session through the service container. We'll get the flash back, that's where the messages are stored. And we'll add one of type success. Your comment was submitted successfully. We finish with a return and a redirection. Because this is what the test needs. We'll generate a URL, blog core post, show. And we remember that here we have to pass a Slack. But in this case we have to pass it in PHP form, because we are in the controller. So we have to do it with an array. So the case for the valid form is done. But what happens when it isn't? We have to return the data that the show is waiting for, because remember that we are using the post show template. And the post show passed the post and the form. So I'll copy the show return. This comment has to be included. Let's run the test now. What it says now is that there's no confirmation message, so the form is created successfully. The last needed thing is that message. The message is being created but not displayed. We'll not include it in the post-show template, but in the core bundle layout. So we can use it in other places where we need to show messages. We open the layout. Where can we place it? Anywhere. I'll place it above the section to show it at the top. Messages in Twig are get from the app session, flashback, and in this case we get them all. Inside this loop we have to implement a second loop that will contain the actual messages. And now we type the message. Let's set it a class. And we display it. We'll style it. We'll set a padding, a background color, green for example, and white for the text color. Let's check it out quickly. Here we have our confirmation message. And also my comment. Our blog works, but how can we create new posts? To do this, we need an administration zone. Let's create a new bundle for it. We'll name it Admin Bundle. Annotation. We confirm. We update the kernel and routing. And the bundle is now created. It created a new controller named default, and we'll empty it by now. But as we need permissions to enter to the admin zone, let's implement a login. To do this, I'll create a new security controller named security. We're in admin bundle, controller. The first thing is to get the request. And the session. Then we get the error, if any. In order to do that, we look into the request object, its attributes, and we check whether it has an error. To do this, we get the security context and we ask for this constant. Security context is in security core. In case there is, we initialize the error with requests, attributes, and finally we get it. If there's no error, we try to get it from the session. And we delete it from there. Next, we return the values to the template. We are not going to return a normal array, but to render the view manually. The view will be in admin bundle, security, login, HTML, tweak, and we'll pass the following. The last username to autocomplete it. We'll get that from the session. And it's also in security context. In this case, it's called last username. And also the error, if any. Let's document what we have done. We are returning a response. And we'll set up the root, of course. The root is /login. For this to work, a second method is needed. It's the login check. That will be empty by now. The root needs to be defined. So we'll name it login check. Let's adapt the layout. This has to be deleted. And also this. We'll inherit from our base. we define the Style Sheets block. And here we'll put an asset. Bundles, admin, CSS, main CSS, which we'll create next. To do this, it's necessary a public directory. And here the main CSS. To save time, I paste it directly. Okay, I close this. And let's go on with the layout. I'll define a header. And here we'll put a different title. We create a navigation zone for sections. The first section will be posts. The second one will be authors. And that's it by now. Next, the section. And here we'll put the same messages zone that we implemented before. Next, we'll define the section block. Now it's time to set up the application security. We go to App, Config, Security. We'll use the default encoder that comes with Symfony, plain text. We'll also use the default role hierarchy. For the security provider, we'll use the in-memory default. To do this, we'll remove user. And we'll leave admin. We'll set admin as password, and his role will be role admin. We'll remove login and secured area default firewalls. And we'll define a new one named admin area. The pattern is the URL. It'll start by admin. We'll leave the anonymous by default. We'll set up HTTP basic for tests, else they cannot pass the security. And we'll define the form login. This has two things: login path and check path. The first one is the form, which has the root of the action we developed previously. And the same for login check. About the access control, we remove the default ones. And we'll generate new ones. For the login, authentication is not required, because users couldn't access, so the needed role is anonymous. But for everything else inside admin, it's necessary to be an administrator. The first thing to manage in the admin bundle will be authors. To do so, they can be created, retrieved, updated, and deleted. It's known as CRUD, C-R-U-D. To generate these common actions, Symfony 2 offers a generator. It's our latest one to see. It's asking first for the entity which will generate this CRUD from. Do we want to generate write actions? That's new, update and delete. Yes. Annotation, we accept the default prefix, and we confirm generation. Symfony 2 has just created the controllers and views to manage authors. Let's check them out. It created a controller in Model Bundle. We'll move this controller to the admin bundle. It also created a test, which will move to the admin bundle too. And its templates, which will move as well. Here we have all the code it has generated just from our entity. Let's fix quickly the coding standards. There are some little things to add. Okay, it's looking nice now. Next, we'll remove these names, so we'll use the default ones generated by the framework, which is the methodology that we have been following in the other bundles. The latest fix to do is to update the root for the generated views, because since we have moved them to the admin bundle, they cannot be found by default. We'll change the namespace too. Let's try to get a root list in the terminal. There's something missing. It seems that the login action is using the root notation without being imported. Exactly, we have the root here. Let's import it here. We close it and we'll try again. Here we have all our application roots, And we see that the admin roots are using the same convention as the core bundle, because we removed the custom root names created by the CRUD. Let's update the admin bundle layout. We'll take a look at the application routing first. Both admin and core bundle have the same prefix. I'll add admin as a prefix to the admin bundle to avoid name collisions, and also it will look nicer in the URL. I open the admin bundle layout, and in authors, I'll set the root, block, admin, author, index. What about the test? Let's see. It's a commented test wanted to test the complete CRUD scenario. Let's fix it. First, we'll uncomment it. We'll add a comment here. In the client, we'll add the authentication configuration. The username will be admin, and the password admin. Since we changed the prefix, we'll add admin. And I'll replace this with an assert true. Client get response is successful. Here I'll type the response was not successful. We check the new entry creation. Let's update the form. Block, model bundle, author, name. That's the correct name, which is already set up. I'll type someone. We follow redirect. I'll separate the values in this assert to make them more readable. I'll filter by someone instead. And here I'll type the new author is not showing up. About editing the entity, we'll add an update button here. I think it's better. For the name, we'll type another name, or another one better. We follow redirect. In this case, it's another one, and a more descriptive error message. The edited author is not showing up. To delete the entity, we search for the delete button. We follow redirect. We'll fix a little typo here, and it will redirect to a page containing the new value. Before trying to run the test, we'll create the login template. To do this, we create the security directory and the file login HTML twig. It'll extend from admin bundle layout. We open the title block. Let's name it admin login. I create a section. And now I'll check for an error. If there's any, I'll show a div with a message. Here we'll show the form. And as path, we'll set the login check root. Let's search it. Here we have it. Method will be post. We begin by the username. It'll be text type. And here we get the variable from the controller. It's the last entered username. For the password, these are the default names used by the Symfony security system. Lastly, a submit type button with the label login. Before going on, if we open the default test, which was created by the generator when we created the admin bundle, we see that there was a default test that we'll ignore. We'll come back to it later on. The test is testing every CRUD part. But if we open index, for example, we see that there are things we have to fix. The first thing is the extends statement, which has to extend from admin bundle. We'll add a title block named authors list. Here we'll not use body, but section. We'll use created and updated at. We don't want the ID nor the slash. I'll remove the link for the created at. I'll add a date format, database-like. I'll remove the ID and the slash. And these roots are not valid anymore, because we are using the default ones. So block admin, author, show. And here block admin, author, edit. Finally, the create a new entry needs to be updated too. Block admin, author, new. Let's run the test. We see there's an error, in particular at line 33. It's saying that the node list is empty. If we take a look at line 33, we have the form, so it's not finding the create. But that is found after clicking on create a new entry. So let's go on updating templates. Let's check out the show one. Same as before. Admin, bundle, layout. Title will be the entity name. Instead of author, we'll type the author name. Created at, and updated at. I don't want the ID nor the slash. I'll change these roots. I'll format it correctly, and I'll come back to the index to do the same. Next, the new. Here we'll type author creation. I format it, and this root is not valid. It's author index. Finally, the edit one. I'll type edit and the author name. And the same for the root. Okay, let's run the tests again. It seems the same problem yet. Let's take a look at the code. We open the model bundle and open the author type, which we didn't update it until now. So let's fix the auto-generated code. I'll inherit doc here. Same for the others. And I'll leave only the name. Next, I go to the author controller. And maybe in the generate URL, there are alt roots. So I'll add here blog admin in each one. Okay, that's all. Let's come back to the test. It's working. Let's check out how the CRUD looks like. When trying to access to the author and not having permission, I get to the login form. I authenticate, and I see the authors list. I can view one, I go back to the list, create a new one. It's redirecting me to its show page. I can update it. All these tests are covered by the test suite. And I can delete as well. It's nice for an auto-generated feature. Next, I'll generate a CRUD for the post. The entity is in model bundle post. I want to create the right actions. Annotation, the root can be post. I confirm generation. Once in the code, it generates a controller directory, which I'll move. Together with the templates. And finally the test. Let's take a look at the test, which is commented too. So the first thing to do is to uncomment it. At this point, I have to authenticate. I add the prefix, After creating the value in the database, I'll get the author value. In particular, the author who has the value David. I'll get his value attribute. So when filling up the form, I type the title new post. For the content, I type this is a new post. And here I type the author value that I just got. I send the form, I follow redirect. Here I'll put the assert components, one on top of the other. I'll filter by new post, and we'll replace the error message with a new post is not showing up. When updating the entity, we have to customize the form too. We replaced edit with update, block, modal bundle, post, title. In this case, we'll type updated post for the title. Here I replace foo with updated post. Same here, updated post is what we're searching for. And the error needs to be replaced too. The edited post is not showing up. When deleting, we have to check that updated post doesn't exist anymore. What happens when trying to run the test suite? Obviously, it has lots of errors, many of them because we moved files between bundles. Let's start fixing. We'll start with the post form type, which is in modal bundle. We'll clean it a little. Here we type the inherit doc. We don't want dates, only the title, body, and author. We copy the PHP doc to the others. And that's it. Next, we go to the post controller. We replace modal bundle with admin bundle. And we start to fix coding standards. Now we'll fix the templates. We fix here a little issue. We'll fix the entity 2. This is post type. And this entity 2. Next, we remove names. And finally, all calls to generate URL will have the prefix blog admin. We now have the post route for the layout. Blog, admin, post, index. We can now work on templates. So I start with index. This is a layout. Here we'll type posts list. Section. Created ad, updated ad. We remove the ID and the slash. We remove this link from created ad. We'll remove here also the ID and the slash. And we'll truncate the body to 150 characters. We fix roots. I copy it. And let's run the test suite. It seems that we fixed a lot of them. Let's take a look at the list. It looks nice. Let's go on with the show template. Admin bundle. Layout. Blog title. Here we'll put the entity title. Section. Entity title. Created ad, we add some spaces to make it look nicer. We don't want the ID nor the slash, and we'll improve the body. Let's fix roots. Now, if we access to one of them, we'll see a useful page. Now for the new template. Here we'll type post creation. Section. Post creation. and a link to the post index. If we run the tests again, we'll see that the same error exists. If we look at line 29, it's when it tries to get the value of one of the authors once in the new entry template. So something is not working properly. When going to create new entry, here we see the error. We are trying to display authors without setting the name, which is very usual in forms. For convenience, it's not usual to set this directly. So the solution offered by Symfony 2 is to implement the toString method in the entity. So we go to the model bundle, entity, author, and at the very bottom we add the suggested method. This method will return the author name. We run the tests again. Now we have advanced a little and the error is different. If we check it out in the browser, the form is displaying out correctly. The only thing we are still missing is the edit template. Let's run the test suite again. And it's interfering with the record that I added manually before, so I load fixtures again. I rerun the tests, and now they are passing. It will be convenient to create a new link to logout, so cookies are cleared. To do this, we'll open our security file. And in the admin area firewall, we add a new configuration for the logout. We set the root, which doesn't exist yet, and optionally, where do we want it to redirect? To post, for example, giving the option to authenticate again. Next, we create an empty action. And we add a root, matching with the one set in the security file. Let's check out this new root. Block admin security logout. Now we only have to add it to the layout. We'll show it only if the user is authenticated. It will be a new item. The root will be the one we copied before. And we'll type logout. If we reload the page, we'll see the logout link showing up. If we click on it, it redirects to post. But since we are not logged in, we have to authenticate. And yes, we came back to the post root. But there's one missing detail. What happens when we want to go to just admin? That root is not found. Let's fix this with a redirection. We'll use the default controller for that, but first we'll write the test. We uncomment it. We authenticate. crawler will request access to admin, and the test we're going to make is an assert true. This assert true will get the response and will check a redirection to admin post. Else, there was no redirection to the post's index. There we see a failure. Yes, there was no redirection to the post index. It's just what's happening. We open the default controller. We write some comments. Redirection will not pass any parameter. It will be a redirect response. The root will be just the root. And now we return a redirect. Passing, where do we want to go? To the post index. Now the test has to pass. The service container stores services, which are PHP classes that do specific things, and they require dependencies to work, which are provided by the container. These dependencies are defined in a configuration file. To see the service container in practice, we'll refactor the controllers to avoid duplicated code, so we get simpler controllers, transferring the workload to services that will act as black boxes. To do so, we'll create a services directory inside the core bundle. And inside services, we'll create our first service named Author Manager. We open the PHP tag. We set the namespace, and next we open the class, which is a normal PHP class. This class will have a private attribute, the Entity Manager. That's our access to the database. To initialize this Entity Manager, we'll use a constructor. This constructor will get the Entity Manager as a parameter. And who is the one passing this parameter? The service container, as we will see later on. So we just save it. Let's define the methods that we will need. The first one can be find by Slack, which will return an author from its Slack. We get the author from the Entity Manager. Find one by. Here we get it. And here we can check whether it exists or not. If not, author was not found. Else, we return it. Together with this method, we'll create another one to search posts by a certain author. We return them, and we configure the PHP doc. Now we have to tell the service container which dependencies to inject to services, as well as to define the services themselves. This file is inside resources config. And Symfony provides us with an example in XML format. I'll delete this file. And I'll create a new one in YML format. This file will start with some parameters. The first one is the class of the author manager we have just created. Next, we define services. The first one is author manager, and the class will come defined by the parameter we have just set. Arguments is where we pass dependencies. In our case, we need the entity manager. So we pass it this way. Since we changed the file format, we have to let know the service container about it. And for that, we have to open the dependency injection directory, open core extension, and here where it says XML file loader, we have to type YAML file loader. And here, instead of services XML, it should be services YML. If we go to the terminal and we type container debug, we'll see a services list. These services can be passed as a dependency, including Doctrine ORM Entity Manager, as well as our author manager, pointing to the class we have implemented. Now we can refactor the author controller. The first thing is to create a private method that will give me the author manager. That's the service we have just created. This is done with the get method, passing the service name as a parameter. If the service name has an underscore, we'll use the camel case notation, as in this case. This will return an author manager. Now, in show action, let's initialize author. First, we get author manager and then we call find by Slack. We see that the IDE is autocompleting it. The error control is not needed because it's already done by the service. And exactly the same for posts. We get author manager, and in this case we find by posts by the initialized author. To check that everything is working successfully, we run the test suite. It's time to refactor posts as well. To do so, we'll create a new service named Post Manager. We'll have an entity manager. We create the constructor. And we create a method to find all posts. We'll implement another one to find the latest. To do this, we need a number that defines the post's number that we want. This number will be integer type and will return an array. I'm going now to the post controller because we now have here implemented what we need. The only thing to replace is this 5 with num and getDocTwin with the entity manager. We can now return the posts, and we'll also implement a findBySlack method. As we have it already implemented, we'll copy and paste it. We replace getDocTwin with the entity manager. Even we'll cut throws here. And we'll paste it here. Here we'll type throw new not found HTTP exception, and we finally return the post. Now we have to go to the controller and start refactoring. We'll begin doing the same as before with author. We'll copy this private method. We'll begin with index. Find all. And find latest. We don't have to worry about the repository. We return the same thing. And index is now refactored. About show. We call findBySlack and we pass the Slack. Let's add the service. We open services. We'll reuse a part of the previous one. Post manager. Post manager. Let's run the tests. Everything's okay. The create comment action is too large. I think that using a service we can fix this. So we'll transfer it to a service. We'll add a new method. Create comment that gets a post and the request object. We'll create and validate a new comment. Let's copy this portion of code and we'll paste it here. We'll leave setPost, comment type. We'll handle the request and we'll check if the form is valid. To do so, we'll use also the entity manager object in both database operations. But it's not a good idea to work with the session from a service, so we'll delete that line. and instead of returning a redirection, we'll return true. Finally, if the form is invalid, we'll return the form itself. We add the return that can return a form interface or a boolean. We'll remove this as well. Lastly, we'll create a new private field, Form Factory. This Form Factory will be passed through the constructor. And we save it. Now we have to configure this in the service container. We open Services and just below we add Form Factory, which we can get from the services list using the terminal. The last thing is to refactor the controller. So we'll get the post object the same way as in show. So we are already saving much space. And we'll get the form calling the createComment method. We pass the post and the request. This is not needed. And we'll replace this with this condition. If the form is true, means that it's valid. So we'll leave this code intact. Else, we'll return the control to the show template. Here, it's not needed to set throws, and the comments creation is now refactored. If we run the test again, oops, something's wrong. It seems that we wrote a create form in Post Manager by mistake. Yes, here's a create form, which should be Form Factory. Create. Let's try again. Everything's ready. Until now, we have been filling up translation files, and to see a language version, we depend on the language configured in the client browser. To select a language in a simpler way, we'll put the language identifier in the URL. We'll begin with tests. We open the one for authors, and we'll focus on English version. We open the one for posts. Here we set English as well. Testing one language is enough. And finally here. Let's run the tests. We start in red. Since we are using roots in annotation format, we have set up them in controllers. If we open the author controller, we see that the root is set up for each action. If we will have many actions, as the case of post, it's not necessary to update the root for each one, but we can set up a generic one for the entire class. We can set it up just here. We'll set the locale special variable between brackets, and we'll add author as well. We'll simplify the show root. Since we are not setting the locale special variable, it's convenient to set the rest of options. With requirements, we'll make mandatory to set a value for locale among some predefined values. We'll set English or Spanish. And we'll also set the default value. English version. We run the test suite again. we have less errors. We'll do the same for the post controller. It's not needed to modify the roots of each action. We'll do the same setting root in the class. To do this, we'll set also the locale variable, in this case without a prefix. Requirements for locale, same as before. It can be English or Spanish. And the default value. English. Thanks to the Symfony 2 routing system, it's not necessary to modify any template. Back to PHP unit. We see that our tests are working perfectly yet. Let's see how it looks like. If we reload the page, we'll get an error saying that we cannot access the root directory. Here we will need a redirection, but I recommend to do it at the web server level. So we'll add manually English. And here we have the English version. With our error management in English too. If we go to the Spanish version, we see everything translated conveniently, including the error validation. This is it for my Symfony 2 introduction. I hope it has been useful for you. If you want to reinforce the learned concepts go beyond, I recommend you to take a look at the official book. See you in the next course!